What's up guys, welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be doing something just a little bit different. We're going to go through every team in the NBA and I'll tell you something that I've liked about their season and something that I haven't. There's a lot of content in this one, so stay buckled in. Let's start right away. Also, if you guys want to skip around in this video, we're going to be going through every NBA team in alphabetical order by city. So with that being said, we're going to start with Atlanta. What I've liked about the Hawks season is Jalen Johnson's development. The third-year forward Jalen Johnson had only started 6 games before this 2023 season, but with John Collins' move to Utah, the Hawks needed someone to step up in that forward spot. Johnson not only is getting more playing time, but his shot selection has improved and his athleticism and defensive presence have made him a must-start for Atlanta in almost every game. What I haven't loved is their inefficiency. I mean, you've built this team around Trae Young with the hope he can be your superstar, and at times, he's been really good, but he rarely shoots over 50% and is just too much of a defensive liability for this team to contend in the Eastern Conference. This team, realistically, will have to be blown up at some point. For the Celtics, I really like that Porzingis is working. As you know, the Celtics made splashes this offseason, bringing in Drew Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis. And while Holiday seemed like the perfect fit, Porzingis would have his work cut out for him to mesh with the Celtics team, and he looks great so far. Porzingis offers a presence around the rim the Celtics haven't seen in a long time, and his shooting splits offer the Celtics versatility to run a 5-out offense when they need to. With that being said, I don't really like to see their second half issues persist again. One of the biggest stories for the Celtics in the Joe Mazzulla era has been their inability to close out games. With late collapses coming against teams like Milwaukee and Orlando already this season, it's reasonable to think this may still be a problem for the Celtics, and you don't want to see that around playoff time. Talking about the Brooklyn Nets, that guard rotation has looked awesome. Going into the season, the Nets guard rotation looked pretty thin, giving guys like Cam Thomas and Lonnie Walker a lot of time on the floor, which they both looked great in. Cam Thomas has been a 3-level threat, while Lonnie Walker's shooting looks better than it's ever been. Both of these young guards could be long-term options in Brooklyn, and that's not what we expected going into the year. With that being said, their defense isn't as good as I thought it would be. For a team with guys like Mikal Bridges and Nick Claxton, you would expect your defensive rating to be towards the top half of the league, not somewhere in the 20s. Claxton has missed some time, so we'll see how that side of the game improves for Brooklyn with him on the court, but we're not seeing their best production on that side, and that's not what I expected this season. For the Hornets, they've had a tough year, but let's be honest, LaMelo Ball is proving he's a star every day. Unfortunately, LaMelo will miss some time, he's out with an injury, but we learned from his early campaign that you can build around Ball to be your franchise player. And with a lot going on in Charlotte right now, it is nice to know that your centerpiece is the answer you hoped he would be. With that being said, the rest of this team stinks. You're the worst defensive team in basketball. Brandon Miller is the only player not named LaMelo Ball that you're even committed to keeping around in the first place. And your forward room, including Washington, Hayward, and Bridges, is a mess for a multitude of reasons. The Hornets still need massive roster turnover to be relevant in the NBA, and they're kind of a long ways out. Thinking about the Chicago Bulls next, I think Bulls fans can be happy that Alex Caruso is going to give them plenty of value. Let's be realistic, Caruso's time in Chicago is probably running low, but that is not for a lack of production. Caruso continues to be an effective scorer who gives the Bulls energy, especially on the defensive end, and a contender in the NBA would be silly not to offer up some big trade package to bring a guy like that in. Caruso will get the Bulls a good return, assuming they finally start that rebuild. But the bad news is you really got to start that rebuild. With Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan both being shopped around, we can officially close the door on those two along with Nikola Vucevic amounting to any sort of playoff success. No matter which one of these guys you trade, even if you trade them all, their value isn't nearly as high as it was a couple seasons ago, and to be honest, you didn't really gain anything from it. Talking about the Cleveland Cavaliers, let's talk about how amazing that offseason was. The Cavaliers had a very under-the-radar offseason where they didn't necessarily make any big win-or-go-home moves, but we've already seen the production that they've got from guys like Max Strus, Jordas Niang, and even rookie Craig Porter. With some early season injuries in Cleveland, these guys had to take over extra minutes, and they proved that they can step up when needed. But with that being said, we've seen their stars start pretty slow. Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell are both down in points per game, and they aren't shooting at as high of a clip as we may expect them to be. With Evan Mobley and Jared Allen still not really being shooting threats on the offensive end, this Cavs offense looks clunkier than years past, and that's not a good sign if they want to make a run. Now let's kick it from the Cavs to the Mavs, and let's say this one time and one time only. Kyrie and Luka work. They're a good pair. After struggles last season, I think a lot of NBA talking heads were ready to write off the Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving pairing, but they've looked great together this season. Their decisive play style and top-tier playmaking in the backcourt leads to improved play from their spot-up shooters like Grant Williams and Tim Hardaway Jr., who are both doing more than enough to help Dallas win games. With that being said, you can't help but worry about their bench production. Outside of Hardaway Jr., who I already mentioned, we've yet to see anyone emerge as a good player off the bench for Dallas. I think people were surprised to see Derrick Jones earn the starting small forward spot over Josh Green, but Green hasn't looked great in the minutes he's played. Not to mention, Jaden Hardy and Dante Exum as your bench backcourt pair makes me question how effective this team will be if the injury bug kicks in. They're not deep. Now let's take a look at the reigning champion Denver Nuggets, and you guys know what I'm impressed about? Reggie Jackson. Reggie Jackson was almost a non-factor for the Nuggets championship team of 2023, rarely getting important minutes for Denver. But with Jamal Murray out for significant time and losses to Denver's second unit, Jackson has been thrusted into a starting role where he's been playing out of his mind. I mean, just recently, he put up 35 and 13 on the Clippers. He's been great. The downside is I think Denver is feeling the loss of Bruce Brown. Say what you will about Bruce Brown's contract in Indiana, but it's clear that Denver would love to have him back right now. The Nuggets could use his versatility as a guy who can play the 1 through the 4 any night. Right about now, without a clear rotation being established and a fourth way through the season, it's obvious that if Bruce was still around, Denver wouldn't have to rely on guys like Julian Strawther and Justin Holiday on a nightly basis. They would be much more solid. If you guys are familiar with the channel, you probably recently saw my video saying a lot of bad things about Detroit. But with that being said, let's look at the good side first. Asar Thompson would be the name that stands out. On draft night, a lot of folks saw that pick as a reach, but getting a chance to develop a raw talent like him should be something Monty Williams can get very excited about. As we know, he's looked great on the glass and the defensive end early in his rookie year, and whether he's a long-term starter or Monty continues to bring him off the bench, I'm confident that he's going to be one of the best players on this team going forward. Now, to talk about the bad in Detroit, it's pretty much everything. This is the most miserable we've seen the Pistons in a long time, and that's really saying something. Jaden Ivey is disappointing. Your big man rotation outside of Jalen Duren is ineffective, and you don't have anyone over the age of 25 who even makes a real impact on your team. Cade Cunningham still looks good, but he's not even setting the world on fire like we hoped he would. The Pistons needs to blow up the team, and it really starts at the top. They have to fire Troy Weaver if they want to have any relevance in the NBA for the next 20 years. Now, to talk about a team that's been much more effective in recent history, let's talk about the Warriors. The good part of this team is that Steph is still playing at an MVP level. I mean, despite turning 35 last March, this is statistically one of Steph Curry's best seasons ever. He's still a threat from anywhere, still a great passer, he finished strong around the rim, and he should still be in MVP conversations. He's doing more than the Warriors could possibly ask him for, and they're feeling that spark. The bad news is the vets just aren't working. Through 20 games, it would be fair to say the Chris Paul experiment is off to a rough start. When Paul and Curry share the court, they look fine. But when it's time for Chris Paul to man the offense with Curry on the bench, he looks completely lost. Not to mention, this season we're seeing hefty falls from grace for Klay Thompson and Draymond Green, and even Andrew Wiggins hasn't looked great all the time. The Warriors are in a really tough spot early in 2023, and they have some things to figure out. Now, don't get me wrong guys, I know a lot of you watched that Jokic video, but I still love Alperen Sengun, and that's the best part of this Rockets team. Alperen Sengun is looking more and more like the next great playmaking center as he's the head of this Rockets offense. A couple years ago, nobody would have thought that he could possibly become a better player than Jalen Green, but that's what we've seen happen, and I expect that to continue as he becomes one of the best centers in all of basketball. The bad part of this team is I'm a little bit scared of Ime Udoka's coaching style. Ime Udoka seems like the guy for Houston's future, don't get me wrong, but I'm scared his scheme will hinder the development of his young backcourt. Ime loves his teams to shoot the three at will, and while that works for his offseason signings like Van Vliet and Dillon Brooks, it's just not great for Jalen Green or Amen Thompson, who are most likely to contribute as slashers in Houston's future. This problem could take a while to emerge, I know, but this whole Rockets team is still a couple steps away, so it is a genuine worry. Next up, for the Pacers, a team we love to talk about here, you guys already know, I'm happy that Halliburton is a top-tier NBA point guard for this team. I mean, as I just said, Banning and I have both mentioned this time and time again on the channel, but Tyrese Halliburton is playing out of his mind, which should make any Indiana Pacers fan very happy. If Hallie can continue to develop like a guy such as Shai Gilgeous-Alexander did, great things are ahead for the Pacers. What I see as a downside of the Pacers 2023 is that lottery pick Jarace Walker is getting wasted. When you invest an early draft pick into a player, you want to see him on the court, good or bad. Unfortunately for Jarace Walker, the Pacers are playing Obi Toppin, Aaron Nesmith, Jalen Smith, and Isaiah Jackson all at power forward at times, so he can't buy minutes. The Pacers have to make some trades to open up that front court because Walker needs to become a role player early, at the very least, if they want him to develop into a real NBA talent. Now, onto a team that's had a lot of turnover this year, let's talk about the Clippers. What I do like about this team is what Norm Powell offers, and that would be consistency. In a year highlighted by that roster turnover I mentioned, star players not living up to expectations, and all of those things that make Clippers fans worry, it is really nice to see Norm Powell playing up to his expectations and being a leader off the bench for Los Angeles. He's also not setting the world on fire, but he's shooting the three well and playing his role, and that's all you could really ask for. On the downside, I think they've completely mishandled the Bones Highland situation. I know you expected me to bring up the James Harden trade here, but I know there are plenty of negatives in that situation, but at the end of the day, the Clippers made the move to win now, and I respect the idea. The downside of that move was they now have an overabundance at guard, which kicked Bones Highland out of the rotation. That might not seem like a pressing issue, but you kicked out a young point guard playing his best ball outside of the rotation entirely to make this James Harden move, which is shown to have a lot of bad alongside the good flashes we see every once in a while. I will say, picking Russell Westbrook over Bones off the bench might prove to be a historic mistake for the Clippers. You can quote me on that. I don't think it's the right move. Now, to the other side of LA, let's talk about the Lakers. One good thing about the Lakers is that your bench finally makes sense. The Lakers have seemed to struggle with depth every year since making the move to acquire LeBron James, but I think they finally put a stop to that this season. Despite an offseason which hyped a lot of fans up, it's really been the other guys for the Lakers who have impressed. Rui Hachimura's coming off the bench and looking strong. Cam Reddish is tough. Hood Schifino and Max Christie have both shown flashes of being studs as well. This Lakers team is finally creating a real bench mob and is making things easier for their stars. The bad part of this team is we don't know who the guy is at power forward. I think the biggest question mark on the entire Lakers team is who plays that second forward spot next to LeBron James. I mentioned earlier how I like Rui and Cam Reddish, and Christian Wood as well as Taurean Prince have gotten those minutes at times as well. But when Jared Vanderbilt comes back, it's going to be a tough call to say who deserves to start alongside LeBron and AD in that front court. And sometimes we've seen there really just aren't enough minutes to go around, and I worry that can make things tough for the Lakers. Now let's talk about a team that's had a pretty tough go at it this season, the Memphis Grizzlies. A good thing about the Grizzlies is Santi Aldama's improvement. Not a lot's going right in Memphis currently, with Ja Morant on the bench. Desmond Bane does look good. Jaren Jackson, he looks alright. But Santi Aldama is a name that's become much more relevant in Memphis this season. His scoring has jumped up to 14 points per game, and his efficiency is right around the same clip as it was last year. I don't necessarily think we're looking at a superstar in the making, but definitely some underrated talent that's showing off. On the downside, there's no life to this team without Ja Morant and Steven Adams. Losing Ja Morant for 25 games was a hit that the Grizzlies had time to prepare for, but at the end of the day, you can't manufacture that production with role players. This is not Moneyball. I would also argue that the team is feeling the loss of Steven Adams just as much. Right now, this team doesn't play interior defense or rebound nearly as well as they did with Steven, and that can be seen by Jaren Jackson's defensive stats plummeting. Steven Adams was always underappreciated in this scheme, and we are really seeing it right now. Let's talk about the Miami Heat. On the good side, it seems like they've fixed Duncan Robinson. After a horrible 2022 campaign, which resulted in Duncan Robinson getting knocked out of the Heat's rotation, we saw him come back to life during their electric finals run, where he looked like himself once again. That momentum has clearly lasted into this season, as he's currently Miami's fourth leading scorer, shooting lights out, and he's actively working to become more of a well-rounded player in the league, which should make Miami fans very happy. On the downside, it seems like Caleb Martin has came back down to earth. Speaking of that playoff run, where it felt like nobody on the Heat could fail, Caleb Martin was one of the big names during that stretch. He was arguably one of the best players in basketball for about a week during the postseason. But we're at the start of a new campaign, and his three-point shooting is the worst it's ever been. He's not making the impact Miami fans would have hoped for, and he's just overall disappointing. The Heat expect more from Caleb Martin. Now, to kick it over to one of the NBA's best contenders, let's talk about the Milwaukee Bucks. And this might be controversial, but I'm happy to see that Dame and Giannis look good on the court together. After a tough start to the season, people were quick to jump on that Damian Lillard trade and claim that he and Giannis had zero chemistry. As the season has developed, I think we've seen that that's just not the case. They're both getting their shots up and have both shown out on multiple different occasions, showing that they still both have the ability to take over games down the stretch. I'm happy with it. On the downside, they do need more guard play. Malik Beasley is playing well, but Cam Payne, Pat Connaughton, and Marjon Beauchamp haven't separated themselves from each other, which makes it difficult to say which one should be getting backup guard minutes. One of these guys will have to prove they deserve time, or the Bucks will need to buy at the deadline to figure that position out. Next up, the Minnesota Timberwolves, who have been shocking the world, and I think the best part of this team is that we can finally confirm that Rudy Gobert is your center. I know people hate Rudy Gobert, and last season he didn't do much of anything to prove that he's a good NBA center, but this year he's flipped that script on its head and he's averaging over 2 blocks again and is leading the Defensive Player of the Year talks up to this point of the season, which makes this team so much more of a threat on defense, and as we know, the best offense is a good defense. Not to mention, Anthony Edwards is leading your team. You guys are the first seed in the West. That is not a bad combination of things. Minnesota should be very happy. On the downside though, you only have a 7-man rotation. There's not a lot about this Minnesota team that hasn't looked good, don't get me wrong, but a question that I think will arise later in the season, especially if guys get injured, is who do they have to offer after that first 7? Does Kyle Anderson, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Shake Milton, or Luka Garza really give you crucial NBA minutes? I'm not sure. Luckily for the Timberwolves, they haven't had to worry too much about that yet, so they're alright. For the Pelicans, I would be happy that Zion and B.I. are actually healthy. For the first time in what feels like forever, Zion and Brandon Ingram are sharing a court together, and they both look really good so far. Not to mention, surprising contributors like Jordan Hawkins and Matt Ryan have stepped up in times for this Pelicans team. What I'm not happy about is their backcourt troubles. Jose Alvarado is finally healthy, but is the combination of him and CJ McCollum what you're going to bank on going forward? How much do you really trust rookie Jordan Hawkins, and is his production based on skill or volume? To be honest, I'm not sure, but there are a lot of question marks in that spot. For the Knicks, you can be happy knowing that Jalen Brunson is the future. Brunson came into this season on the heels of his best individual year of his entire career, and what has he been doing? Even better. 25-5-4 sets him apart as the clear all-star for New York, as we've already seen him single-handedly win them some games. The bad news is that Julius Randle is not. We've seen Randle sort of bounce back from his horrific start to the season, where he looked like the most inefficient player of all time. But to this day, we still see a lack of effort on the defensive side, and his bad attitude creeps into games when the Knicks are underperforming. Trade Julius Randle? Sure. But what is his value at the current moment? To be honest, I don't think it's great. The Thunder have a lot of things to be excited about. My favorite part is that Chet Holmgren looks like he's going to be a superstar. Maybe it's because he has Shea on his side, but regardless, Chet Holmgren has looked like one of the best big men in the entire NBA, not just rookies. Efficient from everywhere on the court, a defensive focal point, and overall one of the most talented and unguardable players on the Thunder, and only his first year of action, you have to be bought in on Chet. The bad news is the Josh Giddey situation. I don't know if we're supposed to say his name on YouTube, but the guy who did the bad thing is still on the roster, and innocent or guilty, he's not playing great basketball. His style of play would work on a team who's not so fast-paced and three-point efficient, but those words just don't describe this guy, even though I can think of a couple that do. Another team that's surpassing most people's expectations are the Orlando Magic. Franz Wagner and Paolo Banchero have to be the most impressive part of this team so far. Both of them together might be a sneaky top 10 duo in all of basketball right now, and while Paolo has much more scoring promise, Wagner is such an incredibly well-rounded player, and there is no wonder why the Magic are playing so well when he plays up to that standard. Cole Anthony, Jalen Suggs, and Mo Wagner all look great as well, but the two-headed snake at forward makes this team run efficiently. On the downside, you have to look at that Jonathan Isaac situation. To be fair, there's not a lot wrong happening in Orlando, but looking forward, there doesn't seem to be much light at the end of the tunnel for John Isaac. He unfortunately had to fight through serious injury most of his career, but in the modern day, he's losing out his minutes to a guy like Joe Ingles, who's just more involved on the offensive end. So this might be all she wrote for Isaac. For the Philadelphia 76ers, it would be a shame to say anything but the Tyrese Maxey mania. We love Tyrese Maxey over here at Next Man Up, so seeing him play up to and almost surpass our expectations as a channel has been incredible to see. Without James Harden, Maxi's become comfortable bringing the ball up the court, and he always seems to have the game in the palm of his hand. This production eases the worries of Sixers fans around the world, and they look solid in the post-Harden era. The bad news is the development of Paul Reed. Paul Reed is another fan favorite over here, and he's a player that Sixers fans love to bring up as one of the most underrated big men in the entire league. With Nick Nurse at the helm, I was excited to see how he would develop a guy like B-Ball Paul. Unfortunately, Reed has been stuck in more of a small forward role, playing limited minutes for Philly, which has done nothing but hinder the 24-year-old's development, which is honestly just a shame to see. For the Suns, you have to be happy that Devin Booker is taking that next step. With KD still being one of the best players in basketball and Bradley Beal missing a lot of time to open up the season, there seemed to be an unusual amount of pressure on Devin Booker to prove himself as a star to the NBA world once again. He's doing that right now, and he looks confident in his point guard minutes. To be honest, I think he's got to be the answer. The bad news kind of bounces straight off that because what happens when Beal comes back? As I just mentioned, Booker looks great in his point guard minutes. As you guys probably know, the original plan for the Suns season was to start Bradley Beal at the point guard and swing Booker up. With Beal coming back soon, will they shift him to point guard, or will he have to fill in more for Eric Gordon's role? I'm sure he could do both, but a change like that could mix up the team chemistry, and you don't want to take any chances when you're competing. Not a lot is going right for the Trailblazers right now, but one thing I've really liked is that Shaedon Sharpe looks great. With Damian Lillard out, there was definitely an expectation that new players would have to take on a load of the scoring, and Sharpe is doing just that. His efficiency's gone down, but his numbers have gone up, and you can tell he's ready to be a leading scorer of this team very soon. Sharpe looks like the best version of himself when he gets looks with the ball in his hands, and I'm looking to see him grow as a clutch player. The bad news is obviously Scoot Henderson's early struggles. Coming from a Scoot Henderson believer, there's really not a lot of positive ways to describe what we've been seeing from the young point guard. Scoot has either been injured or not playing great basketball, and to be honest, he looks lost on defense. He just needs to grow his confidence driving to the lane because he doesn't really have that elite shooting skill to carve his way out of a slump by doing that. I think he'll be great, it's just going to take a little more time than we had hoped for. For the Kings, you can't help but be happy that De'Aaron Fox came back balling out. After missing the first couple games of the season, I think some people may have expected De'Aaron Fox to take some time to get back to his all-star form. But currently, he's averaging 30 points per game and he looks better than ever. With De'Aaron Fox hot, we all know this Kings team can go far. The bad news is they're still playing down to competition. Even with the Kings looking really solid this year, they've still lost back-to-backs against the Rockets, back-to-backs to the Pelicans, and played teams like San Antonio and Portland way too close. They need to dominate these lesser teams if they want to go into the playoffs as a high seed, which would definitely be in their advantage. For the Spurs, I would just be happy that Victor Wembanyama looks comfortable. Like most rookies, Victor isn't necessarily the most efficient player right now, but with the insanely high expectations he came in with, it's nice to see Victor show flashes of all-time greatness, especially on the defensive side. The Spurs are not very good right now, but it's clear that Victor was the guy that they should have invested in, and I'm confident he'll be great. The bad news is I don't like this Jeremy Sochan-Trey Jones dilemma. Greg Popovich is very invested in the idea of making Jeremy Sochan the point guard of the future, and at the end of the day, he's not one, and he just looks clunky out there at times. Although I find it very interesting to see how Sochan could develop as a project player, it's also important to consider how not having a true point guard could hinder Wembanyama's development, which has to be priority number one. The question is it worth it to buy into Sochan when a guy like Trey Jones, who is a true point guard, is sitting right on your bench? I'm not too sure. For the Toronto Raptors, I would be happy being confident that I can build around Scottie Barnes. Coming off a Rookie of the Year victory, Raptors fans were incredibly happy to see Scottie Barnes develop into their franchise player. But last year, he disappointed, putting up almost identical stats to his rookie campaign and showing no real improvement. That's not the case in year 3, and Scottie looks more confident with the ball in his hands, and not to mention, he's also taking more control of the offense. With a lot of trade rumors floating around in Toronto, it's good to know that Scottie can be your franchise guy, and it gives you a direction. The bad news is that Grady Dick isn't working. I know he's only a rookie, but I was very, very high on Grady Dick going into this year's draft, and on paper, Toronto seemed like the perfect destination. But so far, he's looked like the odd man out on the floor, and the Raptors don't use him correctly almost ever. He was recently sent down to the G League to work on his development, and there is plenty of time, but it would be a total shame if the Raptors' great developmental team misses out on Grady Dick, because I think he can be a stud. For Utah, they're not great right now, but we're finding out that Lauri Markkanen wasn't a fluke, and that's gotta be good. After a great season from Markkanen last year, which resulted in him being named the most improved player, it was important to see if he would build off the momentum and take over as a perennial all-star in Utah. Now, he's not as good as last season necessarily, but he's still playing at a high level and is a bona fide first option for the Jazz going forward. The bad news is you don't really have a direction still. With most of the worst teams in the league, the emphasis is giving young guys minutes, hoping you can find some hidden talent. That just isn't the case for the Jazz. The only young guys with potential who even touch the court most nights are Keyonte George and Ochai Agbaji, and realistically, we won't see both of them succeed long term. You invested first rounders into Taylor Hendricks and Bryce Sensabaugh, and if you're not competing in a loaded Western Conference, there is no reason why those two shouldn't at least be getting time on the court. Utah either has to make their team much better if they want to compete, or just commit to the tank already. Currently, they're just wasting time. And we're going to end this video out with a bang, possibly the most controversial and talked about team in all of basketball this year, the Washington Wizards. There is a lot of bad. Don't worry about that yet. Let's talk about the good, and that's that Deni Avdija is figuring it out. The most underrated aspect of this Washington team that I had just said has been notoriously bad this season is the improved play of forward Deni Avdija. It's not often you see a player on a team who got much worse without any real playmakers evolve as a shooter, and he also has become more efficient. Overall, he just looks like a better player than the season prior, and that's exactly what we wanted to see. Even if he doesn't have a future in DC, he has one somewhere, which will at least get the Wizards some trade value. It's nice to see Deni evolving as a player. Let's talk about the bad. The team is horrible. Jordan Poole and Kyle Kuzma never made sense as a combination, and I think some folks could have seen a trade involving one of them being in the Wizards' cards this season, maybe around the trade deadline. I don't think any of us expected is that both of them could be traded before the deadline this year, as the Wizards look absolutely miserable in every aspect of the game. And to be honest, there's no timeline for them to get any better. A lot of teams have work to do, but the Wizards might just have the most. Alright guys, that was a lot of content, so I hope you all enjoyed. Let me know in the comments what's one thing you like about your favorite team this year, and what's something that they need to do better. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you in the next one. Peace out.